Following on the LQ theme of reinvention, your firm provides a number of domestic and cross-border transportation services from Canada. So how have you had to reinvent your business in the last 5 years
certainly,
or so?
I think like most Canadian companies, we've had to adapt to the dollar, which would certainly have been the major change driver. And we've mostly read about that from a manufacturing point of view as individuals reading the newspaper, listen to the nightly news. From our perspective, we're a seller of services. We found the Canadian dollar certainly has changed what our pricing model was and our expectations in terms of both the cost of buying Canadian transportation in the U.S. market, what the value of the dollar that we would receive from a U.S. customer was, and to a great extent, our business model, which I think at points in the past was largely a labor play on selling services to a significant percentage of our customers who are U.S. customers and selling them our labor from Canada. So we were doing just like manufacturers but selling services. And I think there's been more realization nowadays from the political side and the economists on the impact on the service sector as well in Canada.
And now, how have the recent changes with security and border crossings impacted you? And more importantly, how do you deal with them? Because you're really dealing almost arm's length with the carriers.
As a third party, we're in a challenging position, I think. While obviously the carriers themselves have very challenging requirements in order to comply with the border crossing requirements, we're forced into sort of managing remotely the type of provider we're going to bring to our customers, specifically customers who might have signed on as North American or international businesses to provide either CTPAT or the Canadian version, the PIP security system, and to become partners in those programs. We, as a Canadian-based company and a non-asset-based company, aren't eligible for participation in the main CTPAT program, but we are members of the PIP program. As far as our customers, the requirement for them in working with Kelron is having us vet their carriers, make sure that they're appropriately secure and that their processes and their people meet the test. So we're standing in the middle, and in a lot of cases where there might not be an absolute requirement to use a certified carrier, we're still providing a level of assurance that we've done vetting and a contractualization process with the carrier that most customers themselves, whether they have the expertise, they certainly don't have the time or the people to go out and do that type of a process.
Now, you're in a somewhat unique position as a non-asset-based provider. You still have to compete with a lot of the full-service providers in several aspects in providing service. So how do you accomplish that, and even more unique in being Canadian-based?
Well, we have 3 separate streams of business that all run relatively seamlessly together. We have a very transactional business that meets the requirement of somebody who's gotten caught short. Potentially they've had a regular carrier on it who can't handle the surge in volume, or it's a sporadic move where no asset-based carrier might view that as being a preferential lane where they'd want to commit to having availability all the time. We have a business where we act very much like a carrier, that to the customer generally, in most cases these might be Fortune 1000 type organizations with a very predictable requirement to move product between production and warehouse or warehouse and customer on a very predictable timeline. We would provide the same service, meet or beat the carrier cost to be able to be awarded those lanes. And then we have situations where we're actually a transportation management organization where we handle all of the freight requirements for that customer for a particular entity or for the whole organization, depending on what the business model we're working with.
Now, capacity, and how do you deal with capacity constraints? And obviously there's been an ebb and flow with over and under capacity at various times, depending on what the U.S. economy is doing.
I guess, one, clearly we need to understand what is driving the actual operator of the equipment. Right. So what are the things that he's perceiving to be out there? And as the market is moving around a bit right now, that's a much more of a real-time process. In the past, you could get, in the past, I would say certainly the last 5 years up until even what we thought was a capacity surge 4 years ago. Generally, I could get a good read on what it was the carrier was trying to accomplish, and that would generally be relatively consistent. It would last for a while, and there wouldn't be this month-to-month type change. Right now, we're seeing, because of the drawdown on inventory that we had over the last year and a half, we're seeing a big stretch in terms of everyone building inventory back up. Nobody wants to get caught short when the customer goes to the store and we don't have product. So we're getting surges that are very unpredictable, and the carriers who haven't really kept all of their equipment running or have let some of the older stuff go and haven't replaced yet are finding that challenging, and they're adapting by deciding what lanes make the most sense for them. Where can they get the least amount of empty miles? Where can they get the highest efficiency out of their equipment or the greatest return on the miles that they run? For us now, we have a large carrier base. We have to understand beyond the larger carriers, you're now filling with somebody who's got 20 trucks, and I need to understand what's going to motivate him and be able to bring him to the table quickly in the case of a demand that might not have been there a month ago. An example for us of something that's ongoing in terms of capacity, and while it's not so much of a challenge caused by today's economic change, it's a club store that we do a lot of business for as a transportation capacity provider. We pick up all of the lanes that aren't regular and repetitive. When you walk into the club store and you go down the middle aisles where they always have a changing product line, and you tell your friend, geez, there's a great deal on whatever it is you think your friend wants to buy, and your friend doesn't get around to going back to that store for another week or two. When he gets there, of course, the product isn't there anymore because it's very seasonal. They buy whatever they buy, and that's it. When that's sold, they don't have any more of it. And so that is, it might be a month, it might be 2 months, it might be 2 weeks that product would be on the floor. And so from a carrier point of view, I'm not going to move my network around to go get that product for 2 months and then not have it again, because you don't have another vendor in that particular location that I could count on getting other freight from. From my perspective, we start typically, we know a year in advance that it's going to happen, and then a month in advance, if we don't have a carrier base in that neighborhood, we will work diligently to build up our knowledge of which carriers are most likely, and then we dump that back into our TMS and get ready to go, because sometimes it's like there's seasonal products that depend on weather, so I can't tell you it's going to be June 15th. I can tell you it could be somewhere in the middle of June, but it might be early and it might be late. I think in our world, one of the things, clearly there's no shortage of solution providers, and as I said earlier, we're competing with both the asset and the whole non-asset based group, from the global 3PLs down to the little 3PL on the corner. I think we're positioning ourselves as a broad-based niche transportation provider, in that while we're providing domestic transportation within North America, we're doing it on the 3 different levels, and we're technologically enabled beyond what most providers that offer the whole gamut of services would be. I'd say the large guys would all have some form of a transportation management offering and could potentially offer some solutions in the what we term dedicated capacity providing. Most of those people have a hard time getting into the spot market effectively in most cases, whether it would be through my firm or other competitors on the spot market side, would farm out their customers' requirements for the spot. The other thing in our world, I guess, is agility. We are getting, well, in the end, it's still moving by truck, and it's been moving by truck for the last 100 years. We're getting the technology interface, the KPI expectations, the requirements on LTL to have appointment delivery 99% on time at retail locations and with a half-hour window, and or else all heck is going to break loose. So I think we've adapted very effectively in that environment, and I think those are some unique attributes that really are certainly a challenge for any 3PL to consider how to build a model that allows you to move seamlessly between each one of those hats that I wear while not having any trucks to figure out how to do it by.